Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for February 9th, 2024. There have been enormously significant developments over the last couple of days, which go a long way towards determining where we'll be in the future, the next weeks and months. Will the wars expand? What's going to happen with elections, protests, and so on? And it's reflected in the questions I've gotten. There are a handful of questions, and I'll take them because they'll give you some insights into how we can move the situation in a proper direction. Now, let's start with what happened yesterday. I had several emails asking me, what do you think of Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin? Well, the simple point is it was extremely interesting. And what was interesting is that Putin clearly was intending to get across a different picture than what the public in the West is accustomed to when it comes to dealing with Russia. And that is a deep dive into history and the importance for Putin in looking at history in terms of determining what policy should be. He spent a lot of time talking about the history of Russia, of Ukraine, and then in painstaking detail went through the attempts that he made to try and achieve an accommodation with the West after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the inability to do so because of the lies and the intent of the West was not for peaceful coexistence, but for subordinating Russia, breaking it apart, stealing the resources, and so on. And so what he kept coming back to is that Western leaders lie. He said at one point, who is there for me to make accommodations with, to work with? And the primary example that sticks out is that when the Western press says Putin lies, you can't trust him, why do they not look at what happened with Minsk and realize that Putin's view is that the Western leaders in dealing with him repeatedly lie? And in this case, it's especially poignant because the leaders involved in the Minsk negotiations to try to end the fighting, the internal potential civil war in Ukraine after the regime change coup in 2014, that is Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, Hollande, the President of France, and Poroshenko, the President of Ukraine, all admitted that they signed the Minsk Accord falsely, that they intended to use it to buy time to arm Ukraine to fight Russia, and that they never intended to carry out the provisions that were included in the Minsk Accord, which was autonomy for eastern Ukraine and the recognition of the independence or the autonomy of those areas, and to end the fighting. They never intended to do it. So what Putin demonstrated very clearly, and as I said in painstaking detail, that the decision to launch the special military operation nearly 2 years ago was based on a provocation from the West that goes back to the period when the Soviet Union peacefully disintegrated. So that was made very clear. The other broader point that I think came across is that Putin is quite rational. Whether you agree with him or not, he has reasons for what he did. And he has explanations for what his relations were with the West, his disappointment with that, and the fact that we're moving into a new era of history, which he has described on other occasions as unstoppable development. That is the rise of the global South, the end of the colonial order, the Unipolar Order. And that added to that was his insistence that the war in Ukraine could be ended. So I would urge people to watch it for yourself. Don't go in with an expectation that he's going to answer every question you have. Watch the way his mind works. Now, then you ask yourself, why is the West so upset that Tucker Carlson did this interview? And you look at the New York Times, Peter Baker, their White House correspondent, has a hysterical op-ed, a savage attack on both Carlson and Putin, and he accuses Putin, among other things, of using social media to manipulate the West. Well, Putin has a hard time doing that because much of the social media has censored Russian narratives. So the idea that, and this of course goes back to Russiagate, that the Russian bots won the election for Trump in 2016. What the West is upset about, the Western establishment, is that the whole order is collapsing and a new order is being created with the support of the majority of the nations and population of the world, and that no amount of military engagement, military attack and aggressiveness can stop it. As Putin said, it'd be like trying to stop the sun from rising instead of accommodating yourself to the fact that the sun's going to rise every day. So the rationality of Putin is on display. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't argue that he doesn't have a backing for what he's saying, including an extensive historical and philosophical outlook. Now, compare that to the second question that came in, and I had a few people who asked what I thought about the report of Robert Hur, the special counsel looking into Biden's handling of classified documents. In particular, one person wrote in, given the special counsel's report on Biden, that the classified documents did not amount, his handling of classified documents did not amount to a criminal indictment. Won't the Democrats be forced to choose another candidate? Now, what did Hur find? Well, unlike the case against Donald Trump on classified documents, Hur's conclusion was that while Biden willfully retained and shared highly classified documents, criminal charges were not warranted. Now, I didn't read the report, so I don't know for sure why he said it's not warranted, but that's not the main issue. What's causing shockwaves is his conclusion that the failed memory of Biden was a significant factor in the investigation. And it raises questions about both his competence and his mental acuity. This at a point where nearly 3/4 of the population is worried about whether Biden could serve another term because of his evident intellectual degeneration. Now, this is no big surprise to anyone who's seen him deliver speeches and forget what he's trying to say, forgetting names, forgetting where he is. But I would say, look at the contrast between Biden when he reads a 3-minute statement and Putin when he delivers a 2-hour dialogue with Tucker Carlson. And the real question is not the concern about the Democrats' dilemma in nominating Biden, but the danger to the U.S. security and to world peace with him in office for the next 11 months. And I think that's what should be focused on. Do the Democrats have an option? Well, apparently not. Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Adam Schiff. The Democrats have become a party of war, a party of bailouts, a party of deindustrialization through the green policy, the party of the woke agenda, and it's a party that's going to collapse. The question is, will it bring down the United States with it? And so the real issue here is not, did Biden escape somehow? Was this unfair? I mean, I'll leave that to other legal analysts. What I would say is the evidence of Biden's degeneration is what clearly stands out from this special counsel's report. And that's why not only the Democrats should be concerned about their electoral chances in November 2024, but humanity should be concerned to have someone in that declining state of mind in the most powerful position in the world. Now, I had questions about in terms again of the Biden policy, the implications for the broader war continuing in Ukraine and Gaza. Now, in Ukraine, the question is, why won't the U.S. accept that the war is lost? Well, because that would be an admission that what the United States has done, as precisely as Putin said, since 2014 and before, the 20-something years before that, leading up to the 2014 coup, that the U.S. has had an agenda which was not peace, which was not unity in Europe, but of breaking up Russia and stealing its raw materials, of destroying Russia as a potential adversary. And the Ukraine war is the most clear example of that. The fact that Lloyd Austin said repeatedly, our goal is to weaken Russia. That Lindsey Graham says the war in Ukraine is a bargain for the United States because of the Russians that are being killed and the destruction being done to Putin. The intent was regime change. Now, how do you back off from something like that? Do you acknowledge that you were wrong? What about the $113 billion that has resulted largely in further destruction of Ukraine, the killing of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, and the loss of stockpiles of weapons in the Western countries? For what? What was the purpose? Well, if you go to negotiations now, you'd have to admit that negotiations were possible not only in March 2022 and April 2022, when the NATO countries rejected the deal that Zelensky had worked out with the Russians, but that peace could have been done long before that. And the issue was NATO expansion and the threat to Russia. So it would mean you'd have to look at the last several presidencies of the United States and realize that the U.S. is the guilty party for this war, and that the continuation of the war does nothing for U.S. security or world peace, that Putin offered to negotiate an end to the war. Biden and the West rejected the deals. And so the trap in Ukraine is not only of our own making, but it's going to continue until the U.S. is prepared to eat crow, step back, and say, we were wrong. And do you think that will happen with a Biden administration? Well, probably not. And that's why the Republicans are withholding funds for the war, as Donald Trump has said this war should stop. And Trump is now the front runner in the Republican Party. It's going to cause a very interesting election campaign. But in the meantime, more people are dying because of the continuation of the war. Now, finally, on Gaza, the question has been asked, what was Blinken trying to do on his visits, his most recent shuttle diplomacy, where he talks about how sad he is about the destruction of the civilian population, but then, and tells Netanyahu to be more careful, but doesn't cut off the weapons, doesn't cut off the money. The U.S. has the power to stop this war. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has made it clear that not only will the war continue, but now with over 1 million people crammed into limited space in Rafah, will Israel launch a ground invasion knowing that they're going to kill thousands more innocent women and children by doing so? Well, unless the U.S. tells them to stop, they will. And there we see the problem. Now, so someone wrote in and said, isn't the problem that Israel controls the U.S. government? Well, there's this whole story out there that the Zionist lobby controls the banks, controls the U.S. government, it controls everything. Now, ask yourself this. Is it possible that these policies are what the establishment wants and they use Israel as the hammer to cause this to occur? This is essentially what the breakaway ally scenario that was drafted by Paul Wolfowitz was about, that you can use Israel to launch attacks that then will cause the United States to have to come in and clean it up. Now, why is that the likelihood? We'll go back to the whole creation of Israel. Go back to the Balfour Declaration. Go back to the end of World War I, when the British Empire was trying to figure out how to maintain its global power of its navy and control over finance. The geopolitics comes from this, the geography. how to use the band of area that we call the Middle East, or that's technically Southwest Asia, to prevent it from falling into hands that would limit the Brits' ability to control international trade. Because you have the Suez Canal, you have the Red Sea, you have the Persian Gulf, you have the Indian Ocean. These were the choke points of trade that were controlled by the British Navy going into World War I, and that was threatened by the Russian Empire, by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so the decision was made to take the Zionist movement and impose it in Palestine as a means of continuing the divisive situation there, the divide and conquer between a Jewish state and Muslims. And the creation by the Zionists of Israel was considered to be a moral necessity. The British used the fact of Hitler's destruction of Jewish culture in Europe and the murder of 6 million Jews. They used that as an excuse to create a divide and conquer situation in the Middle East. Now, we see that today. The whole point of this is what? Well, as the Unipolar Order is collapsing, there's a new cooperation alliance that's emerging around the BRICS. Look at the map of Southwest Asia. Look at the countries now in Southwest Asia that are part of the BRICS: Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. And then on top of that, you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are countries that are committed to peaceful economic development, using the Belt and Road Initiative as one major impetus for doing that. But this is where we're seeing the emergence of a fight between the weaponized dollar to stop development versus the attempt to use national currencies and alternative financing systems so that credit actually goes into physical production. That's the fight. That's what people like Wolfowitz and Cheney and Rumsfeld saw when they were developing this policy in the 90s. That goes back to Brzezinski, goes back to Kissinger. And where did they learn it from? Bernard Lewis. They learned it from Halford Mackinder and his geopolitical doctrine, which was behind the Balfour Declaration and the creation of a Zionist state as a settler colonial movement in the Middle East. So who benefits from this? Well, the Israeli population is not benefiting. Their economy is being destroyed by this. There's incredible divisiveness, divisions within Israel over especially the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his championing the cause of the radical settlers of Greater Israel who want to drive all the Palestinians out. And the rest of the world is opposed to that, as we saw with the response to the International Court of Justice provisional measures, which said that the genocide must stop. So here we have a situation where the Biden administration is willfully allowing a British geopolitical scenario to stay in place for the purposes of maintaining a unipolar order. Now, it's from that standpoint, then, I urge you to watch the interview with Putin. It's detailed, it's complex, but it's extremely interesting from this standpoint. Are we going to have an order defined by peaceful cooperation and development, as laid out by Helga Zeppler-Roush in her call for a new security and development architecture, her 10 fundamental principles of peace, returning to the Peace of Westphalia? Or will we continue a geopolitical doctrine of conflict and war over scarce resources and the destruction of sovereign nation states and freedom on behalf of the interests of a global establishment? That's what the fight is. And I think by watching Putin, you can get some insights into that will help you when people come back at you with, well, Putin's a new Stalin, he's a new Genghis Khan. Anyone who watches that will be convinced that they've been a victim, or should be convinced that they've been a victim of a Western media narrative. So thanks for joining me this week. Share the video, go to the LaRoucheOrganization.com website, and I'll see you again next week. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche Organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.